Assalamu alaikum. Sorry for the delay. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to another event of AMSA. Today we have organized another event, an event on evolution from the Islamic perspective, and the talk will be given by a Muslim researcher of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association, which is the AMRA. But before we go to the topic, specifically to the topic, I would like to introduce the AMSA Society. Before, for that, I would like to invite Tahir Nasser, the the National AMSA President.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I won't speak for long, I'm just going to briefly introduce Ahmadiyya Islam. So Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association is the student branch of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Community is a worldwide community established in over 200 countries now. It was founded in 1835 by an individual, founded in 1889 by an individual who was born in 1835, whose name was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, His Holiness Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, he claimed to be the reformer promised within Islam, known as the Messiah and the Imam Mahdi. He said his functions were twofold principally. They were to refute the external attacks that were occurring at the time upon Islam, and they were to strengthen Islam by demonstrating in his practice and through his word also the pure and unsullied teachings of Islam. One of the issues that has plagued Islam and plagued religion, especially in the 20th century, is this apparent or so-called dichotomy between science and religion, and it's typified more than in any other topic than in evolution. And to this day, people who are atheists or people who speak against religion often use evolution as a tool or a weapon to try and demonstrate that religion is unrealistic and has no relationship with the hard facts of life. So today we've organised this event called, what's it called? No, I'm joking. Evolution, the Islamic perspective. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Adil Bajwa, Dr. Adil Bajwa, to the stage for his talk.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. I thank the Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association for inviting me to do this talk on the Islamic perspectives on evolution. The general position of the Holy Qur'an on science and nature can be understood by the emphasis the Holy Qur'an places on scientific inquiry. For instance, it's interesting to note that there's about 750 verses in the Holy Qur'an which exhort believers to study and reflect over nature, and this compares to 250 which are legislative. For example, in chapter 16 it is stated, "And he has pressed into service for you the night and the day, and the sun and the moon, and the stars too have been pressed into service by his command. Surely in that are signs for people who make use of their reason." In another place in the Quran it's said, in chapter 67, "No incongruity can you see in the creation of the gracious God. Look again, do you see any flaw? Still look again, and yet again your sight will return to you tired and fatigued." So the model of nature, natural laws in Islam is that there is absolute consistency and absolute unity between the Word of God, which are the scriptures, including the Holy Quran, and the creation of God, which are the sciences and what we observe. There's no conflict. So moving on to evolution and Darwinian natural selection, just a quick introduction, I'm sure you all know this well. The principles are that organisms generally have more offspring than can survive to adulthood, and these offspring are not identical. There's variation in what they look like and what they can do and their characteristics. So the inference is that those organisms that are better adapted to their environment have a greater likelihood of surviving to adulthood, and if you survive to adulthood, your chances of reproducing and having offspring are higher. So it's survival of the fittest. But Darwin made these observations before the discovery of DNA. And what we now know about DNA is that DNA is the basis of inheritance. So this leads us to neo-Darwinism. Now, neo-Darwinism has taken Darwin's principles of natural selection and interpreted them in light of the discovery of DNA. And the principles are very similar, namely that random germline events like mutations and genetic recombination leads to variation in offspring. You're not identical to your parents. There's some minor degree of difference. And those genetic changes that are advantageous to survival propagate, because if you have advantageous genetic traits, you will live longer, and if you live longer, your odds of reproducing increase. So what happens in the long run is the number of organisms which have these advantageous traits begin to outnumber those that don't. And that becomes the norm for the species, or even a new species is born. Now, the neo-Darwinist movement is led by biologists like Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins goes a step further. He believes that neo-Darwinism has great implications for religion. And this is a quote which is typical of his quotes, of a speech he's given in the United States, where he says, "Darwinian natural selection is so elegant because it solves the problem of explaining complexity in terms of nothing but simplicity. Essentially, it does this by providing a small, gradual ramp of step-by-step increment. The elegance of Darwinism is corrosive to religion precisely because it is elegant, parsimonious, and economically powerful. The God theory is not just a bad theory. It turns out to be, in principle, incapable of doing the job required of it." So what he's saying is, because he believes he can explain creation of man and organisms by a simple step-by-step process, then what is the role of God in creating organisms? There is no role for God. And God in himself becomes relegated by this theory. So what does the Qur'an have to say about evolution? And this is one of a number of verses where evolution is spoken about. In chapter 30 it is said, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your tongues and colours. In that surely are signs for those who possess knowledge." So it's talking about creation and talking about signs for those who possess knowledge. In another place in chapter 45 it is said, "And in your own creation, and in that of all the creatures which he scatters in the earth, are signs for a people who possess firm faith." So the question is, what are these signs? Well, I think you can have an understanding what these signs are by studying the evolution of any complex organism, like for instance the giraffe, and we'll take this as a case study. So the giraffe is a hoofed mammal. It has its closest living relative is the macaque. It is thought that the giraffe has evolved from a deer-like creature, and it has several unique characteristics, the most obvious of which is its huge neck. Now interestingly, the giraffe has 7 vertebrae, which is the same number as most mammals, including humans. But obviously these vertebrae are much larger, much bigger, and this allows the giraffe to grow to 5 to 6 meters. Why is this a survival advantage? Probably because it gives the giraffe more access to food, because it can reach the tops of trees and bushes that other animals can't reach. Maybe it allows it to look further so it can see dangerous prey coming towards it and react accordingly. But it's not just the vertebrae which are bigger in the giraffe. Other components have evolved as a consequence of having such a long neck. For instance, the primary ligament of the neck of the giraffe is unique among mammals, because the ligaments are usually composed of collagen, but in the giraffe it has evolved this ligament to also have muscle fibers, which is unique, and that allows it to have more strength and more flexibility and move the neck around. So it's a unique characteristic that has evolved because the neck is so long. Similarly, the skeleton is adapted to having such a long neck. The bones, again uniquely, are stronger than any other bones of mammals. They're more flexible, so the giraffe can reach low down. They're much longer, so the centre of gravity of the giraffe is raised high enough for it to move around. So again, specially adapted features. The heart is specially adapted. On the left, you've got the deer's heart, and on the right, you've got the giraffe's heart. So you can see how much that heart has had to evolve for it to cope with having such a long neck. And the reason is it needs to work harder. Now, how does the giraffe cope with having such a long neck in terms of avoiding fainting? Now, the brain needs a constant supply of blood. If that flow of blood is interrupted even for a second or two, you will faint. So you can imagine this is a big problem for the giraffe because it's got such a long neck. And what it has done, it's evolved special valves you can see on the right side, and that's the internal jugular vein. And these little grooves, which are valves, which stop blood flowing the wrong direction. And this maintains a blood pressure in the brain of the giraffe when it extends its neck up. So this again is a special, adapted, unique feature of the giraffe, not present in other mammals. So the picture we are building is that the neck has not evolved on its own. It's not just elongation and larger cervical vertebrae. The entire structure and physiology has had to evolve with it. Now, according to neo-Darwinists, this has happened at the maximum speed of one generation, one genetic event per generation. And what they also say is that each event, genetic event that occurs, must yield an immediate survival advantage. So how does this step-by-step process happen in practice? Well, if we just go back now to the early deer that's going to evolve into a giraffe, and imagine the first moment that the neck of this deer elongates, even by an inch or two, and what effect this has on the heart. Well, even if the neck elongates an inch or two, this will put an additional strain on the heart of that deer. Not much of a strain, but a little bit of a strain. And that is important because then, when in future there's a mutation in the genes of the heart that make it stronger, the natural selection will choose it. Because it becomes a survival advantage, because that animal needs to have a stronger heart. So the heart becomes stronger, it evolves step by step. And you can say the same thing about the primary ligament of the neck. The neck elongates, it puts a strain on the neck muscles, then eventually when there's a mutation in the neck that puts muscle fibers into the primary ligament, at that point it will be selected for because it gives a survival advantage. And the same process occurs for the legs, and you can imagine the same process for the development of the jugular valves. So what we appear to have at first glance is a model of how evolution of the giraffe's neck can occur in a step-by-step increment and lead to the evolution of other components in the giraffe. But there's a major problem with this approach. There's a paradox. And the paradox is this. The elongating neck has at every step a negative impact on every other part of the evolving giraffe. But it must have this negative effect, because without that negative effect, these components will not evolve. So with this negative effect on so many different organs, where is a survival advantage? The first moment the neck elongates in this early deer, whatever advantage it gains by having access to more food is completely swamped by the negative impact it will have on the heart, the neck muscles, the skeleton, with episodes of fainting. So rather than this elongating neck being a survival advantage, it is in fact a survival disadvantage. And remember, this model is a massive oversimplification. There's dozens of other characteristics of the giraffe I've not even mentioned, like the esophagus, the central nervous system. You know, almost every organ is different. So in short, when the giraffe's deer-like ancestor elongates its neck for the first time, according to Darwin's law, it will be wiped out by natural selection, and it will not evolve. The problem is, for neo-Darwinists, is that the giraffe has evolved. And the same paradox is applicable to every other animal that has adapted to its environment. For instance, the polar bear is not just a white grizzly bear. All of its organs, its skeletons, its sensory systems have evolved specifically for it to cope with a colder climate. So the first moment the grizzly bear moves north, any single step of evolution that occurs for it to cope with this colder climate will not be enough for it to adapt sufficiently. The bear will not, if it doesn't adapt to its new environment, natural selection will not select it. So rather than evolving, it will die. And the reality is that the same problem applies to every observed complex animal, because all complex animals are known to have adapted to their environment. Now, moving on, there is a similar, if not greater, objection to neo-Darwinism in the evolution of sensory organs. Now, this is a grossly oversimplified schematic of a sensory system, like, for instance, the eye. So what happens with the eye is that you get sensation in the eyeball. This is then transmitted to the central nervous system in a nerve, the optic nerve. The central nervous system then interprets that signal, which are images, and then output signals come out from the central nervous system to target organs like your muscles and your endocrine glands, and you have an effect. So, for instance, if you were to see a bus coming towards you, you would see the bus. That image would go to the central nervous system, which would send signals to your muscles, and you would jump out the way. Similarly, if you were hungry and you saw some tasty food, if that signal will go to the central nervous system, you'll start salivating. Now, sticking to the evolution of the eye, this is actually quite well studied, and there is a pathway that scientists have found that they think that the eye evolved through. In the top corner, you've got a picture of a hagfish. The hagfish is an eel-like creature, which is considered a predecessor to the vertebrates. Now, it has a very primitive eye. This eye is buried beneath translucent skin, and it cannot see images. It cannot see images, but what it can do is detect light. And that gives it an advantage, because on detecting light, that signal goes to the central nervous system, and it can figure out whether it's night or day. This then sends signals to endocrine glands, and the metabolism of the hagfish is then altered according to whether it's night or day. Now, that's a survival advantage. If, for instance, if it knows that it's daytime, then the hagfish can increase its metabolic rate, which will be useful because it will have more chance of reproducing, more chance of finding food. And this excites evolutionists, because what it shows is it's a simplified version of a mammalian eye. It's showing evolution in action. Now, further along the story of the evolution of the eye, you'll come across the lamprey. Now, the lamprey is another eel-like creature, which is a primitive vertebrate, and it also has a very primitive eye. But unlike the hagfish, this eye can actually see. Not very well, but it can see. Thus, the evolutionary path of the eye has gone through a phase of being able to detect light for the regulation of its metabolic function, and then somehow, however slowly, reach the point where it is able to detect images. But the lamprey must have evolved not only the ability to detect images in the eye, it must have developed the ability to transmit that signal down its optic nerve, and then to interpret that signal of an image in the central nervous system, and then to evolve mechanisms to respond to that image and send out appropriate output signals to the appropriate target organs. And what would be an appropriate response to an image? For instance, if it were to see appropriate food, the lamprey would swim towards it. So just consider then how the hagfish eye can possibly initiate this evolutionary journey in a single step-by-step process. If you imagine the first mutation that occurs in the eyeball of the hagfish, that moves it away from detecting light and towards detecting an image, the problem neo-Darwinists face is that that initial incremental change needs to lead to a survival advantage immediately. But unless there's a simultaneous mutation in the optic nerve that allows it to transmit that signal of an image, unless there's a simultaneous mutation in the central nervous system that allows it to interpret that signal, and in the output signals, and in the target organs, unless all these things happen at the same time, the fact that the hagfish can see an image for the first time will not yield a survival advantage because it can't act upon it. And this same problem is applicable to every sensory organ that has evolved in biology. So in the end, what we're seeing is that the evolution of any multi-component system cannot have occurred by incremental evolution of individual subcomponents. The step-by-step incremental model of Dawkins is completely inadequate. So where does this leave us? It either means that the mutations themselves are multiple, coordinated, or survival is not just based on fitness. And there's a verse in the Qur'an that hints towards the latter. In chapter 28 it says, "And thy Lord creates whatever he pleases and chooses whomsoever he pleases. It is not for them to choose. Glorified be Allah, and far is he above all that they associate with him." So my interpretation of this is that this is hinting at, rather than being natural selection, there's a divine selection, that God is somehow choosing which animals live and which animals die. But how does this fit in with science? Is this scientifically valid to say that this is happening? Well, the explanation for this will be the same explanation for miracles. For instance, like how Moses was able to cross the Red Sea with the Israelites, but the evil Pharaoh who was chasing him was drowned. What's the scientific explanation of that? According to Islam, these miracles are not supernatural events, but what they are extraordinary natural events that occur in time, at a time and a place in history that it's hard to believe that this is down purely to chance. There is an intelligence behind this because there's a context. In this case, the context is this, that Moses, who was able to cross the Red Sea due to some rare but naturally occurring meteorological event. It could have been a tsunami, there could have been a high tide, any number of things you can imagine that we are seeing in this country to some extent. And that event saved him but drowned Pharaoh. Now you could argue that Moses was just lucky, and people are lucky, people win the lottery. But why was this a miracle? The miracle is this, is that there's a context, and the context was this, that Moses claimed to be a prophet of God, and Pharaoh was opposing him. And of course we all know there's another verse in the Quran that says that Pharaoh would be preserved as a sign for people, and not so far from here you will find that sign in the British Museum. So the conclusion on studying evolution is this, that it's almost impossible to have occurred by chance alone. There must have been some coordination. There must have been some planning, some coordinated mutations that have occurred. And the context that makes this interesting is that these signs that we are finding were revealed to exist to the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Holy Qur'an, which was revealed to him 14 centuries ago. So this was, in my opinion, the Islamic perspective on evolution. And my inspiration for this work is the work of the late 4th Supreme Head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad, may God be pleased with him. He was a man of God. He was a student of the Qur'an, which means he was also a student of science and a student of evolution. And his book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth, was the first time in religious literature where evolution's role in bringing you closer to God was explained. And if you're interested in this book, if you speak to the organisers, I think they can arrange for you to have a copy of that book. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Adil Bajwa. It was a nice talk. Hope you guys enjoyed this as well. Now we are going over to question and answer session. For this, I would like to invite the chairman of the Research Association to the stage as well as the chair, who is Mr. Naveed Malik.
Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum to all. Peace be upon you all. So I'd like to thank, first of all, Abrar for inviting Dr. Adil Bajwa Sahib and myself to this really, really interesting and fascinating event. And most of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Adil Bajwa Sahib for delivering such an interesting talk. So there are lots of ideas here to do with theology and to do with science. And let's be frank, the idea that the two do not intersect, so the idea of religion and the idea of science, they do not intersect, is no longer valid. We know that there is a big intersection between the two. So I was asked to, before we move on to the question and answer session, to introduce the Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association, of which I serve as the chairman. So if we study the Holy Quran, we find that it says certain things. It says, ponder over the heavens, look upon the stars, roam over the earth, study the ancients and the remains which they left behind. Look at the mountains and wonder over their greatness. Look upon the bee, study and examine the mosquito and things even smaller. All these things, all these words, why, what, wonder, how, think, understand, occur again and again with amazing emphasis. These words are a call simply to science and to research. The Holy Quran is not a textbook of science. It should be evident to all. It is a book of spiritual revelation to bring people towards goodness and to get them to bring peace upon themselves and the rest of society. But what the Holy Quran is a call to research and science. And it is the same call which was heard by Archimedes of Syracuse. It was heard by Newton of England. It's the same call which was answered by Feynman of Caltech and Abdus Salam of Imperial. And it is the same call which we endeavor to answer in the Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association. So this association was formed 3 years ago about. And its purpose is to bring the youth of our community towards research, towards science, to get them to wonder over the creation of the Almighty God. Because we think that's one of the noblest forms of worship. That is worship, to appreciate the beauty of the creation of God, to understand it, to do research, to investigate, to do science. Because that's what the Holy Quran is actually talking about. And how we do it in different ways. We encourage, we organize events for our youth so they get introduced, so they mingle with actual researchers and scientists, so they learn about how to actually become scientists. We organize events, for example, just two days ago, we took a group of youngsters to Oxford University, and that event was hosted by the university itself, who told them about admissions, how to get into university and what it takes, how hard they have to work. So we do a lot of outreach work. We also have something called research cafes, where we have these kind of discussions very similar on a smaller scale in an informal environment. And the discussions go from pure science to theology, to philosophy and so on. So just recently we were discussing infinities and what infinities in mathematics and infinities in nature. That's essentially what we are about. We also have an astronomy club. So we have a 4-inch diameter telescope We can see Jupiter with it. We can see Saturn with it. The planets. We can see it's a fairly powerful telescope. What else? So you can see the moon. You can see the craters inside the moon. You can see the craters within the craters. So we encourage all these kind of activities, and at the same time, we bring this call to all people of religion and all people without religion that there is absolutely no discord between science and religion. So the scripture is the word of God and science is the act of God, and both need to be appreciated. So with that, I will finish my little introduction, and I think we should go into the question and answer session, if that is.
And before we go into that, Dr. Adil Bajwa has just introduced a book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth. It can be found online. This is the cover of the book, and it can be found. There are two ways of accessing it. Either you can contact me after the event and we will send you the book, or you can access it online on alislam.org/library/books/rrkt.pdf. After the event, I'll write it down for you if anyone is interested. Thank you. Can I ask you to chair the event?
Yes. Yes. Thanks. So let's go into the question. So I think you just raise your hand, and if you've got a question for Dr. Adil Bajwa, please ask, and feel free to ask questions. It's better if you start off with questions which are relevant to the talk itself. We can perhaps veer into things which are slightly more general. Yes, please.
Dr. Bajwa gave an example of giraffe and said that if a neck has to become longer, all other components, various components have to go at the same time. Whereas I think Darwin theory is that each component grows within a generation, one by one, each component. Now, he mentioned that if 2-inch increases, it will put some strain, maybe not complete disaster. Let's assume 1 millimeter, not 2 inches, or 2 millimeters, or a centimeter. If let's say 1 millimeter, after evolution is a million years job, and maybe 50,000 generations have passed through that, 1 millimeter will not put a big strain. So it can happen millimeter by millimeter, and other components adjust by it, even though at the end I don't understand why we needed a giraffe if a deer was good enough. But if it has to happen, what's the problem? So I think the theory, step by step, one generation seems okay.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So if because there's no microphone in the audience and we want to record this event, so if it's okay, if I may repeat your experiment, please correct me if I get things wrong. So I'll represent the gist. So the questioner asked that Dr. Bajwa talked about the evolution of the giraffe's neck and how it actually elongated. And he pointed out that different parts and different systems within the giraffe have to elongate alongside it. And this, not just elongate, have to change alongside it, such as the heart and so on. And this can only happen mutation by mutation, so generation, once per generation. So if there is, and the argument was made by Dr. Bajwa that even a small elongation of the neck would put a lot of strain on the other systems. So even a 2-inch elongation would put a lot of strain on the system. And that would be actually a selection disadvantage for the giraffe. The questioner suggests that let's not say 2-inch, let's say a very small elongation of the neck, a millimeter and so on. And evolution takes a long time. So why can this not happen?
I mean, I've thought about this, and initially I think what you're saying is that maybe there's some reserve, some physiological reserve. The heart can cope with a small elongation of the neck because it's very small. And we know in biology there is a physiological reserve. The heart does have a reserve. For instance, my height is more than anyone in this room. So maybe my heart has to work harder. My heart might not be bigger, but there's a reserve. But the problem is, we know that the giraffe's heart has evolved. We know that the giraffe's heart has genetic changes. So we know that the physiological reserve is not enough for it to cope with an elongating neck. If the giraffe could cope with its long neck with the heart the size of the deer, then this thought would be valid. But because genetic changes have occurred, that there must be an explanation of that. And the explanation is this, that those genetic changes are required. That at some point it will become a requirement for that heart to evolve. And we know this because it has evolved. So this is the one benefit we have of looking back at evolution. So that's the problem. The physiological reserve, or compensating for a few thousand generations, eventually will not work because evolution has happened in those organs.
So, question?
It's also different. In a way, I have a question regarding the fossil records that we have of evolution. So in Darwinian natural selection, it postulates the idea that things happen very steadily over time, and there were, hundreds. We should, in the fossil records, for example, we should find a deer, and then a deer with a longer neck, and then a deer with a little bit of a longer neck dying, and then a deer with a bit of a longer neck. We don't find that kind of examples across all organisms. What we find is something which was posited by a scientist in America called Gould. I was just saying, I think his name was Jeffrey Gould. Said that that what we find in the fossil records is actually that we have these explosions of animals. So one very well known is the Cambrian explosion, in which you suddenly had a stable number of animals, and then suddenly you had an explosion in the number of mutations over a very short period of time, and you had thousands and millions of organisms suddenly being produced, and then it stabilized, and you had another explosion. So in what way, so that's actually more kind of realistic, and in a way the neo-Darwinists don't relate to that. So my question to you is, how does that fit in with the concept you produced? Not produced, or the concept that you're putting forward. And is there any evidence of that kind of idea in the Qur'an, really, I guess?
Can I repeat?
Yeah.
So if I may repeat the question. So the questioner has asked that the idea which the Darwinists present of gradual bit-by-bit evolution, that is not, as far as we can see, represented in the fossil record. So for example, from going from deer to a giraffe, you don't find a deer with a slightly longer neck and then another deer with a slightly longer neck. So there are ideas which have been proposed by biologists, by Stephen Jay Gould, I think it is Stephen Jay Gould, that evolution takes place in not gradually, bit by bit, but it takes place in explosions. So such an example is a Cambrian explosion, where you get very fast evolution happening over a very short period of time. And so the questioner asks, how is that perhaps represented in the Holy Quran or in the ideas which he has presented?
I think you've got to be slightly careful, because there are examples in the fossil records. Not many in relation to the giraffe. There are a few examples. And the danger is that you go into the God of the gap type of situation. Now, evolutionists would say that if there are some examples, then perhaps it's just a matter of time before you get more and more fossil records, and then you have a greater picture of the evolving giraffe. But I think what's a more pertinent question is, why haven't some of these species survived until today? Why do they all have to be wiped out? It's one thing to say, where are the fossil records of intermediate species? But I think what's a more burning question is why some of these intermediate species have not lived till today. And the reason why that's a relevant question is that each species, by definition, has to be selected by natural selection to be fit to survive. So these are very fit species. They have to be. But they're not fit enough to survive until today. It doesn't make any sense. And you've got one or two examples in evolution, of very distantly related species. Like we know, for instance, the deer has survived, and we know the giraffe has survived. Now, if you imagine that they're related to each other in evolution by some common ancestor, it's hard to believe that all the intermediate species, for one reason or other, have to die out. And you can appreciate this better by looking at the evolution of intelligence. Now, it's pretty obvious to believe that intelligence is a great survival advantage. It is a great survival advantage. I mean, human beings have an extraordinary ability to survive. If the Earth exploded tomorrow, there'll still be human beings alive in the space station. We have this extraordinary ability to survive, and it's because of our intelligence. Now, according to neo-Darwinism, there must have been thousands, if not tens of thousands, of intermediate species of pre-humans who must have had some degree of intelligence.
Not to the same level as human beings today, but just imagine there would have been a predecessor with 80% of our intelligence, 50% of our intelligence, 30% of our intelligence. That would, however small the level of intelligence, it's still intelligent. What happened to those species? Why can't they survive till today? If a monkey can survive, why can't the intermediate species survive? So it's one thing looking at the fossil records. The real question and the real conundrum for the neo-Darwinists is to explain why intermediate species don't survive till today. Because according to their theory, each species is getting fitter and fitter to survive. But all these huge gaps. So I think that's another very, very strong argument against neo-Darwinism.
So what's your answer? I mean, is it that all of those animals, all of those species, they all evolved together, and so there was none left of them?
Someone is choosing certain species to survive, and someone is choosing for them to die. And I think this is the hand of God. God is choosing certain species to evolve and wiping out other species out. There must be some other explanation. Certainly, the easiest thing to say, it cannot have occurred due to neo-Darwinistic principles.
What about the Quranic? It's just about the Quranic verses and some supported.
Well, the question was, are there any Quranic verses to support it? I mean, there was a Quranic verse I put up at the end, that it's Allah who chooses. And what it means, well, my interpretation of that is that Allah is selecting certain species to survive and deciding which species is to die. But the verses in the Quran that refer to this are the verses that say that there are signs in the creation and in the variation of creation. There are signs for people who are righteous, for people who possess knowledge, for people who have faith. And those signs are that you look at, study evolution, and eventually, or quite quickly, you'll come to the conclusion that there's an intelligence behind this. And that intelligence, I believe, is God.
Okay, so if you have a question from the back.
The brother wanted a Quran verse where it says how basically these animals or humans, I could give him one if that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. If you look at Surah 24, verse 45, it says in the Quran that Allah has created everything moving, living creature from water. One of them are some that creep on their bellies, some of them walk on two legs, and some that walk on four. Allah has created what He wills, verily. Allah is able to do everything. Okay. But then if you look at another surah, Surah 18:37, I just get the... It says, his companion said to him during the talk with him, do you disbelieve in him who has created you out of dust? This is talking about the humans. Your father Adam alayhi salam, and then out of nutfa, mixed semen drops of a female and a male or a female. But this shows that, we was created from dust, and then from a female and a male, semen drops. And if you want more verses, I can give that to you.
So if I give a very quick summary of that. Thanks very much for that. So I think an audience member has suggested certain verses which point towards certain stages of evolution. I won't be able to go into the exact details, but I'll reference the verses. The first verse which was cited was Surah 24, verse 25, in which different, so I think it's mankind which is referred to, right? So we created you from water, and it's talking about human beings?
No, this is talking about animals, because we know that humans are made from clay.
Ah, I see, okay.
But
so you're
in terms of creatures like animals, this is all made from water.
Okay. So what the questioner has suggesting that the different stages of animals have been suggested in this verse. So being created from water, and then crawling on their backs, on their bellies, and so on. And the questioner suggested there's another verse which suggests, it says that we created you as an Adam, as in mankind, out of dust, and then out of the sperm drop, and so on. So that was just representing what the question was. Yep.
I have a jumble of 3 questions. I hope you won't mind my asking. Okay, from a geological perspective, or in terms of what we know about the universe, I think it's 14 billion years that the universe has been in existence. 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth was amalgamated, formed, or however you want to call it. Human beings have occupied a very small amount of time, on this planet, and in regards to our contribution. I guess the question is, if we say that Allah Ta'ala perfected the world for us, for human beings, we've only been around for a very small time of it. What significance and importance would the previous species play before us? Like, I can understand you might say, well, for instance, the dinosaurs contribute fossil fuels, etc., etc., etc. But I don't know whether that's true for every species that has existed before us. And the Holy Quran specifically says that we have not created the earth and the heavens as a playtime, as a pastime, sorry. So if those organisms that have survived before us, the initial progenitors of our species at the moment, and yet they play no important role in our daily lives, where does the link form, what was the use, what was the benefit? This is something that I've often heard from my atheist friends and the rest of it. And the second question is, what's your...
Just one question at a time? That's all right, that'll be easy on you. So the questioner asked that the time scale of geology and of evolution of life is millions and millions of years in span. And the time period for which human beings have existed is very small, is incremental in comparison. So what role all these species and all these phenomena which have occurred from beforehand play, how they're relevant to human beings?
Yeah, because I would have assumed that we are the final creation, we are the...
So the question says, assuming that mankind is the final creation, is the ultimate purpose of all this evolution taking place, what is the role, what is the usefulness, what is the relevance of all these species which have gone before?
Very good question. I mean, obviously there's certain animals that we make use of by eating them, by using them to clothe ourselves, and using their oils and various other things. But there's a lot of species that isn't the case. Look at how many butterflies there are. There's thousands and thousands. Look at all the beasts in the sea. Some haven't even been discovered. So the question you're asking is, what use do they have to humans if human beings are the purpose of creation? Well, from the verses of the Quran, one of the uses is that in them it says that there are signs. There are signs for you. And one of the signs is that you will study evolution and you will come to the conclusion, I believe, that there must have been an intelligence behind this evolution. And I think that's a big thing. I think, in my study of evolution, the conclusion is always the same. There must be a unique intelligence behind this. Now, whether God needed to have so many different species to demonstrate this, that's a question you can put to God if you like. But it's an example of his creative wonder. You know? And no one will deny the beauty of the natural world. I mean, it is a spectacular thing, isn't it? And you know, it doesn't matter which beast you go and look for, they're all spectacular and they're all incredible. This, I think, is an expression of God's creative wonder. That's one of his attributes. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's...
Could I ask another question?
Yep.
What's the Ahmadiyya Islamic point of view on the first Adam then? Where do we draw the line between what was species before us and, you know, conscious, not conscious, sorry, I'm getting the middle up, but the first life form that had that sort of spiritual, mental awareness that, you know, where God said, right, this is where I'm starting the mankind off from. Because, you know, there is a theory that we have had a distant relation with apes and the rest of it, so hence why I'm asking this, in regards to early humans and the rest of it.
Okay, so the question which has just been asked is about Adam, which is the reference which is normally taken as the first human being. So how does all this idea of evolution relate to Adam? Basically, was he the first man? How, you know, did he evolve, and so on?
Do you want to answer that?
You want me to? So the question has been referred back. So, if you read the Holy Quran, on its own, let's see what it says. So let's forget about any other interpretations we might have. Let's just read the Holy Quran. So the Holy Quran doesn't say that anywhere that Adam was the first man, that we created Adam the first man. The Holy Quran says, and we made him Khalifa, vice regent, successor upon the earth. And we made him, so the word used is not khalaqa, it's ja'al. So we made him vice regent of the earth, which indicates that this event is taking place when Adam was already there. And yet, and again, when the Holy Quran talks about Adam himself, when it points towards, and actually some of the verses reported before also talk about this, talks about that Adam himself has been created through different stages. So you have been created through varying states, it has been mentioned. And it is a general, if you look at the general context of the Holy Quran, one of the first attributes which is mentioned is Rabb, of God, of Allah, is Rabb. So it's the general idea that God creates in stages, that's what Rabb actually means. So the picture which I would draw from this is that Adam wasn't the first man, but he was the first man who was capable of representing God. The first man who had evolved, not just in terms of what would you call intelligence, but also in terms of moral faculties, who was able to take on, who was to represent God and take on God's instructions. And thus he's called Adam. So that would be my answer. Yep.
So my question would be, in the Quran it says that it doesn't say that Adam alayhi salam was the peace be upon him, was the first man. Tell me who was the first man to be created, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that to his angels that today I will create man, and they asked him that why would you create someone who will cause fitna, means destruction, bloodshed and everything to the earth, and he was made from clay. From that we know that first man, and this was not he was a man of God, but he was sent for a punishment to the earth, to the dunya, what we call the dunya. Now, could you tell me who was the first man who was created, who was in the earth? Now we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, like I said, the ayah of the Quran. This is in the Quran. If you read about it, Surah Sad is everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about, how he created him and how shaitan, opposed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
Yeah, everything is in the Quran. And so I want to ask you, who's the first man that was created then? And if you mean, what do you mean by different stages? How's Adam created by different stages?
Okay. Do you want to refer to that question?
I would like to comment on that. I suppose you have to
Actually, I suppose you have to summarize it.
Yeah, because okay, so the question says that the question is saying in the Holy Quran, it mentions that it says that God created Adam, and then the angels afterward suggested to God that why are you creating Adam? It will cause bloodshed upon the earth and so on. So the questioner suggests that it is the Quran is saying that Adam was created, in that it's suggesting that Adam was the first man. And if Adam wasn't the first man, who was the first man? That was the question. So do you want to have a comment? Yep.
As he pointed out, I don't want to answer the question, but perhaps I can refer you to the verses and you can elucidate upon them. I mean, in Surah Al-Baqarah, it doesn't say, and we told the angels to submit to the first man. It says, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I'm about to create a khalifa in the earth. Yeah. And a khalifa means, by definition, of successor. So it means that there must have been human beings. Please. Yeah.
If you would call someone Khalifa right now, would he be the king?
This is not a debate. I'm just referring him to the verses.
Yeah. So let's have a dialogue. So you've yeah. No. Absolutely.
See what your guys' in sentiment is. I'm not here to cause a debate, but when you're saying something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always says in Quran, now if you read Khalifa in Arabic, what does it? It doesn't mean successor.
May I continue? May I give you the verse? First of all, Khalifa does mean successor. It means a successor. It also means a representative. Okay. So by the virtue of the meaning of the word successor, it means that there were human beings before him. As for the various verses of the Holy Quran which talk about Allah Ta'ala creating Adam in different stages, this is evident from the fact that Allah says we created Adam from dust at one place. In another place in chapter 15, verse 27, he says, and surely we created man from dry wringing clay, from black mud wrought into shape. In another place, in chapter 71, Surah Al-Nur, verse 15, it says, and he has created you in different forms and different conditions. In chapter 71, verse 18, it says, and Allah has caused you to grow as a good growth from the earth. So these are all referring, we believe, to the different conditions and different stages of Adam's creation. Now, as for or human beings' creation, and Adam was the name of the first vicegerent, the first representative among the humans who was capable of bearing the divine law, which is why the commandment of the angels to submit to Adam does not relate to his creation, but rather it relates to his appointment as a Khalifa, as a representative of Allah. And so that is the
But when he was created, he was not really, he was not really there to say that, okay, he's going to go to the earth, he's going to be a prophet. This was afterwards. Like I can show you the verses in the Quran. He says, remember when your Lord said to the angels, truly, I'm going to create a man from clay. So when I fashioned him and breathed into him his soul, created by me, then you fall down prostrate to him. So the angels, now prostration here does not mean the prostration of worship, it means the prostration of respect. This was what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was ordering the angels. So the angels prostrated themselves, all of them, except Iblis. He was proud and one of the disbelievers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to all Iblis, what prevents you from prostrating yourself to whom I have created with both my hands? Are you too proud to fall prostrate to Adam, or are you the one of the high exalted? Iblis said, I am better than he. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. Allah said, then get out from here, for verily you are outcast. Now, obviously from what we know from here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam. He was the first man to be created.
So can you quote the verses again, just for everyone else?
This is in Surah Sad. If you could go and read inshallah, it's from 71 all the way to inshallah 77. Yes?
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is talking about that I will create a man from clay. So that shows that what the angel said to him, what did the angel say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You will create a man who will, now cause fitna, cause bloodshed and cause turmoil in the dunya. Now from that we can see that obviously the first man that was created was Adam alayhi salam. No, he was not a successor of anyone, because why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran that I will create a man from clay? That is clear proof
So are you saying the Holy Quran is wrong when the Holy Quran says that we'll make him successor? So the word is
no, the successor here, you need to see the Arabic, you need to read it.
So I will tell you, if I may. So because this was a point of information.
Was it? What? Can you show me the number, ayah number, please? Because the thing is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So it's, if I may, so it's Surah Baqarah.
Yes.
So that's Surah 2 and verse 31. So it could be quoted either before 30 or 32 because in different Qurans it's different. So it was a point, if I may raise, so it's a point of information. So if I may, it's just to point out. So the meaning of the word Khalifa was mentioned. So Khalifa, the root word, if I may, please, if it's 31, but it might be because in different Quran sometimes verses are numbered. No. What I mean is that in some of the Holy Qurans, the Bismillah is counted as a verse, and sometimes it's not. So the numbering might be off. The Quran would be the same. So if I may, please. So this point of information was about Khalifa. So the Khalifa root word comes from Khalaf, and that means that someone who comes after. And if you look at the way the Holy Quran itself uses that terminology, so Harun is mentioned, Hazrat Harun, peace be upon him, is mentioned as a Khalifa as well. So that was a point of information. So if I may, if anyone has any other comments on there, so if
Sorry, I'm just going to clear up. I'm not here to debate. I'm sorry, I'm not here to debate. I'm just going to clear something up. I mean, you said Surah Baqarah 31, and he says, and he taught Adam all the names of everything.
So I'm saying you got the wrong verse. So if you look at the verse 32.
32? Okay, and then the angel says, glory to be you.
Sorry, 30. It will be 30, because the numbering is upside.
The Lord said to the angel, I'm going to face mankind generation after generation on earth. They will please read the Arabic. Alright, it says here, وَإِذَا قَالَ رَبُّكَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنَّ جَعَلْنِي
If I can quote if you want, it might be better because everyone can hear. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. So the two operative words which I was suggesting was ja'al, just to make, and then fil ardi khalifa, will make khalifa in the earth. Okay.
But verily I'm going to place mankind generations after generations on earth. There's nothing to say with Adam and Islam.
So which word is generations on there?
Generations.
So I think, yeah, so perhaps this is something which perhaps can be commented upon by others, or we can discuss it afterwards. So there was a question.
It's not a question. I think this gentleman is right, whatever he's saying. Today's topic was whether humans have evolved from something or not. We know that humans were created by God separately as a human. So there's no problem as far as that is concerned. I think we should concentrate on about the evolution aspect, because that was the topic for today.
I want to ask about evolution.
Okay. Let's. If I may. So I think we circulate around. I think we give everyone an opportunity to answer. So, and if there are discussions, I think it's good that we're having a dialogue. But when discussions get too much involved and there's some technicalities, it's better to discuss them afterwards. So if I may take a question from, front row.
At the beginning, a certain verse of the Quran, however, we should actually try and discover it as well. What verse was that? At the beginning, you were saying about how we should try and understand in knowledge and science. The very, very beginning. I just wanted to get the reference for that.
Okay, so I remember the wording, but I won't remember the exact reference. So there are lots of verses. So if you read the Holy Quran, you will find again and again that says that those who ponder over the heavens, I think there's someone with the reference, those who ponder over the heavens lying on their sides, they wonder and they reach the conclusion that surely it is God which made the heavens and the earth. Is there a reference from the back? Help me out.
If I read it, it's Surah Al-Imran 192. Those who remember Allah while standing, sitting and lying on their side and ponder over the creation of heavens and the earth. How aloud, thou hast not created this in vain, may or save us then from the punishment of the fire.
Okay, so that's Surah Al Imran, and the verse was.
What does that really mean?
The verse was 192.
That's what it means. Doesn't have they say
to be in a position of remember Allah. It means in everything that you do.
Okay, so so if I may just suggest, so I think it's better if we communicate through the chair, and I think everyone gets a fair chance of speaking. So the reference, if I may clarify, the question was not asked about what we were discussing previously. So the question was asking about what I said about where does the Holy Quran say that you should ponder over the creation of the earth. You know, how does it actually help encourage human beings to research and to investigate God's creation. So that was a different question, perhaps, than you were referring to. So if I can have a question, take a question from there.
What is the significance of the Galapagos Island evolution?
Okay, so the question is, what is the significance of the Galapagos Islands in evolution?
I mean, the significance is that it's an isolated environment which enabled Darwin, who studied there, to look at these animals and see, you know, because it's cut off from the rest of the mainland, it means that the animals that were there would have evolved in this small environment and would have had to adapt to that environment. So it's like a smaller laboratory, if you like. You know, you've taken a small bit of the earth, and it's a lot easier then to know what's in the environment and see what animals are there. And obviously, historically, it's important because Darwin studied there.
Okay, so a question which hasn't been asked.
Just to brief, the brother was asking. You answered one question. One question he asked: who was created before Adam? The name of the person who was created before emotion was created before Adam.
Okay, so the question refers to what was said before about if Adam wasn't the first human being to be created, who was created before Adam? Okay, so the answer would be there would have been other human beings there.
Is it in the Quran?
So when the Holy Quran actually talks about after the incident has taken place where Adam has apparently committed a mistake and God is and Adam is misled by Iblis, which has been mentioned in the Holy Quran. Interestingly, the Holy Quran then says that, O people of people who follow Iblis, and O people who follow go forth upon the earth. So the pronoun which has been used is not that you two go forth. So it's not saying to Adam and to Eve that you two go forth, because that would have been a different pronoun. So the pronoun which has been used is more than two. So it's referring to people. So what it can be inferred from those verses is that Adam was made Khalifa. Khalifa for who? For what? So there came a time in human evolution where mankind reached such a stage, and it's not just about akal, not just about intelligence, we reached the stage where sociality developed. Okay, so there must have been a time as such. I will refer back to that. So sociality had developed, but and therefore there was a need for God to guide them and how to live in a society. And the person who was the highest in his morals, who developed in the most complete fashion, was Adam. So he's the first prophet. He was the first person who achieved that status. So that is what my answer would be.
I'd just like to add something. Bring this back to science. If we take Adam as the first prophet, then if you look at what science tells us about the evolution of man, they are precursors to man. There's a Neanderthal, there's Homo habilis, there's Homo erectus. Those fossil records are available. You can go and look at them, they exist. These fossil records have been created by God, and they're preserved. We can look at them. You wouldn't have to travel very far. So my interpretation is very simple. Adam was the first prophet. He was the first, as Naveed Saab has said, the first human being, of intelligence, of morality. But there were precursors to human beings. We know that. Science tells us that. And the Quran tells us to study science. Now, if you don't want to take that as evidence, then that's up to you. If you want to ignore the verses in the Quran that tell us to study science, that's up to you. But the evidence is pretty much overwhelming. Next question.
If I may rotate, so a question from the back.
No, I just wanted to add the verse. You said you referred to a verse, but you didn't give a particular verse. The verse is chapter 2, verse 38 or 39. I'll read out the Arabic. It says, قُلْ نَحْبِتُ مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. Now, jami'an cannot be used for any, is always used for two or more. It's not two or more, it's used for more than two. So it has to refer to a group of people. And it says, so we said, go forth all of you from here. Some of you are enemies of others, and few there is an abode in the earth and a provision for a time.
But so you know we have jinns living just with humans, right? Jinns were created before humans.
So this is going to a different topic. I just wanted to give that reference.
Okay, thank you for that reference.
You have a jinn. The day you are born, you have a jinn with you.
Okay, so next question. Is there...
Well, I was going to add to that, but also another question, the second question, is that basically I came with a lot of trying to find out how to debate was in the 80s as well. One of the biggest things the 80s saying is that we evolved from everything evolved itself. It wasn't like God's creation. I was trying to get some verses to show that Islam, that it says in the Quran, that yes, there are signs showing that men have grown, and the sign that God has made us into science that the people grow, they change, they adapt. So I was going to ask for Quranic verses about that. That show evolution actually in. Because right now, you're giving a theory based on from atheist. Here's what the atheist is going to say when I present this. He's going to say that you may be making theories based. All I've got so far is the Quran says we should research, go out and find, right? But where is there Quranic verse saying that is that there's an evolution happening that actually supports this? Because right now we've made scientific theories, and anything is based. And the way, like the giraffe, right? You show the science of it and the chances of something happening, and through evolution, it's grown and adapted. That's a scientific fact, but that's also based on chance as well. And then you've gone by the most likeliest chance, which is evolution. But many scientists make many theories, don't they? So you go by which one's most logical, which one has the biggest chance. So I'm looking for something where in the Quran it states that this is what's actually happening. It shows they can actually back up evolution on an Islamic basis, not on a scientific basis. So that's the best way I can debate with the atheists.
All right. So the question had quite a few ideas. So I think the gist of it was that so up till now the questioner is saying that what has been said is that evolution that the Quran encourages to study science, but it doesn't actually say that evolution took place and that the evolution of life and humanity took place in stages and so on. So we know there's scientific theories which were actually presented, but where is the evidence in the Holy Quran? So if I may refer, so the talk was about that itself, and I think there were verses which were a lot of them presented, which were to do with that. So perhaps afterwards, I think if we can exchange notes as such, so that'll be a good idea. So how much time, by the way, have we got?
I think it's
Sorry, just before we take the next question.
3 more minutes.
Sorry?
2 more minutes.
So we got 2 more minutes of this scintillating debate. Well, not a debate, actually, more for discussion. So, question from here, if I may come back. Yes.
My question is, if human beings, if we believe the Apostle recorded plus the Holy Quran, and believe that human beings did live on this earth because God Himself in the Quran, God said that He has created you in various states, and the you means us. Where's the verse? I have the verse here. I'll come to my question, but God says in chapter 71, verse 3, and He has created you in different forms and varying stages. The same thing as speciation, same thing as coming about. And then God, in the next 2 verses down, then says that Allah has caused you to grow as a good growth from earth. So it also indicates that you were grown from this earth, you were not grown from the sky. Now my question is, regarding Adam, it's if we believe that humans were here and they evolved and they were humans, and then one human was selected when he had the mental capacity to receive revelation, and he was selected and God chose him to be the prophet, what was his Sharia? And what was the message that God gave him that he could tell his people? He must have, he was intelligent, but he must still have a very primitive mind compared to us. So, is there any indication of the Holy Quran that there is, that he was given a message to give to people?
All right. So, yes. So, if the question basically, the questioner is asked that there are verses in the Holy Quran, I think Surah 71 verses 14 to 15, what is the matter with you that you expect not wisdom and stateness from Allah, while He has created you in different forms and ever-varying states? And then 3 verses down, and Allah has caused you to grow as a good growth from the earth. So the questioner is saying that as Adam evolved, and he was the first person, as according to the questioner, who reached such a stage of intellect and moral excellence, that he was chosen by God. What were the instructions of God for Adam? Is that correct? So what would be the Sharia for that so-called primitive, if you put it, person? So I think if I can invite, I can invite a comment later, if that's all right. If I can invite a comment, if I may repeat. So if I may invite, I'll come back for a comment on that. But I think let's give the respect to the questioner, for he has asked the question. So again, it's something which the I think I can, from my point of view, speculate in that sense. But you have to understand there are 2 things. Actually, it's quite interesting in the Holy Quran, because at one time there are 2 stages of intellectual evolution which the Holy Quran mentions. So according to my reading of the Holy Quran, and there is one stage in which it doesn't talk about what you call sociality. In Urdu, there's a word tamaddun. The Holy Quran doesn't talk about. It talks about there is aql, so there is basir, so the man could analyze, could look and analyze, but it doesn't talk about sociality. Then there is a verse which talks about sociality, and this is a word. This is a verse which mentions first. It's quite interesting that okay, we created you from dust. Then we created you from the sperm drop. Then we created zawja. And it's interpreted and it's in different ways. But the way which I think is the best interpretation is that obviously when you have the sperm drop, when you have creation, when you have sexual intercourse, you have male and female. So you have zawja already in the sense which we use. So zawja is used in a different meaning here, and it's talking about that you have different peoples related to each other. And this is a very fine point. And I think it requires a more subtle examination of the Holy Quran deep. So that's the point where Adam, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, came. In my view, so where there wasn't only intellect, there was sociality and the moral system which comes out of sociality. And what that implies is that that's the stage when man moved from individual living and moved towards a society. And the Sharia and the laws which you would have talked about would have been the laws which govern relatively primitive society. So how to live together, what rights to give to each other, what in terms of sexual discourse, what are the limits and what are not the limits. So it's a long question.
I may have some viewpoint of this myself.
Okay, so the questioner.
In the Holy Quran, in chapter we're talking about Adam in Jannah, Allah tells Adam in the garden. The word is Jannah, but it's translated as a garden, and the garden, I believe, was on this earth. Because Jannah can also mean a garden, a beautiful place where you find plenty of things. And in that, Allah Ta'ala actually says that it is provided for thee that thou will not hunger there and will not go hungry, you won't go naked, you won't get thirsty, and you will not be exposed to sun. So actually there were, this is verse 20, 118 and 119. And God actually, this is the Sharia. Like those people were like animals. They did not wear any clothes. They did not know how to get food. They did not know how to defend themselves. God actually told them through these that you should take a wife. So He actually says take a wife. So you should have marital relationships. The second, He tells them that you will not go hungry. Live in a community where you can get food together and you can survive better. You will not go naked. Wear some clothes. You would not get thirsty. If you are in a community, you will be able to find water much easily rather than living in caves or separate like animals. And you will not be exposed to the sun. This is also similar that you should have a roof in front of you. An animal is always exposed to the sun. But if you have a roof, you have some kind of primitive houses. You can have a roof and you will be safe from the sun. So I think this is the kind of instructions that God gave Adam, which He gave to His people to live in a community. We live together, so we won't go hungry. We should wear clothes. We shouldn't go naked. We should have marital relationships in a proper way. And that was the first civilization that God started.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much for that. So can I have the verses? So for the listeners on the microphone.
20, 118, 119, and 120. Chapter 20.
Yeah.
118, 119, and 120.
Okay. One more question. One more question.
But you do know that animals don't have souls. So therefore,
sorry, if I may. Sorry, I have to clamp down. I'm sorry. I think if you just are.
Animals cannot be in Jannah.
Sorry, if I may.
Therefore, you say that the garden is not Jannah.
Okay, thank you. So I think.
Respect the Quran.
Okay, so I think it's a basic ethics of when we get together and we talk and we have a dialogue. I think there's ample time which has been given to a lot of different opinions, and there will be time for discussion afterwards. So there's no need to actually, countermand the chair and also talk across the audience. So I actually teach in a school, and sometimes the situation comes to be fairly similar. So I think it's good that we maintain a friendly atmosphere, because we're all here to acquire knowledge and to get towards truth, and we pray that all of us get towards that. So if I may come to a question from the back.
I just wanted to add just one more thing. This is a good thing. You say that if Adam alayhi salam wasn't created, wasn't the first man created, then why was Adam taught all the names? For example,
Yep. I know the verse. Yep.
وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء.
Yep. And
he was probably all the names.
Yeah.
There was another man created before him. He would have been mentioned in the Qur'an.
Yep.
At least would have been involved in that.
Okay. So just a very quick. So I know the verse. So the question is about if Adam wasn't the first man, why does it say that God taught him all the names? So surely if there was a man before, he would have been taught all the names. So my very quick answer, because we're running out of time, is that what does asma mean? What does the name mean? I'm not, it's a rhetorical question. So what I would say is it refers to the attributes of God. So if you look at what the names mention of God is, it's the attributes. So it's a way of recognizing God. Allah Ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rab. So these are deep meanings which not everyone. So the man before Adam if you could refer to that person as Ma, would not have been able to recognize that name. So that I would end with that question. I know there is a person waiting for a long time, so I'll allow that very quickly, and then we can discuss it later. Yes.
I just want to say there's a lot of our brothers and sisters here who might not have had the chance to read the book behind you. And in fact, the thing I put up there, or I asked Imran to put up there, was some verse in the Holy Quran which would talk about the science of the Holy, evolutionary science of the Holy Quran in a way that is, you can understand from a very basic perspective and understand it. The brother behind you spoke about jinn being created before us, right? I just wanted to say that if you go, if the brother had a chance, you can go to the contents page. There's 2 chapters which answer this question about, first of all, how the jinn formed before us and then human beings came after that, or whether it was a simultaneous thing. I just thought that everyone should benefit from knowing.
Thanks, thank you for that, Mahid. So there was a reference to the book Revelation, Rationality, Truth and Knowledge, and there are chapters on it which refer to the role of the jinn and what the reality of that is. I think we're coming to a close, otherwise we'll be kicked out. So let's have a discussion afterwards, okay? You have to...
You mentioned that animals do not have souls.
Okay.
That's very important for us to understand.
Okay. So thank you for that comment. Thank you very much. Okay, with all the greatest of respect. I think we should bring this to the end. I would like to thank everyone for coming and everyone for contributing. Okay, sorry, I'm doing his job, so give it to him.
Sorry, I would like to thank the chairman of the Research Association for chairing the question and answer session, and of course Dr. Adil Badwa for answering the questions, and also for giving a great lecture today. Thank you for coming to this event, and we will have more lectures like this in future, and we would really love to have you guys there as well. If you're interested in attending such lectures, please leave your name with us and we'll contact you and inform you about our future events. After the event, there's a stall set up here. For every unanswered question, you can come here and we will be happy to answer those questions. We couldn't cover all the questions. I know some brothers have here some questions unanswered which we couldn't answer here because of the time, but you're very much